Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Surgeon Syndicate. This is your host, Dr. Michael McManus, and we are back here for the second part of our conversation with Dr. Lee Newton. Lee, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks again, Mike. It's great to be here.
All right. So we talked a lot in the first half of the interview about if a medical professional is looking to build their own building, kind of get out of the lease market and into owning, and a lot of the advantages there, and then the process of doing a lot of that planning. So if you missed that, go back and listen to it. There's some great insight in that first half of the show. So now I wanted to come back to, because in your bio, you talk a lot about your special interest in affordable housing and what we've seen in the housing market in the last really couple decades. So tell me a little bit more about what you're doing there.
Well, when the pandemic came around, I took that opportunity. I think I had about a month without patients. I took that opportunity to get a little nerdier than I was. And prices of homes had already begun to increase. We were starting to experience a housing supply crash or shortage. And we had the FOMO, the fear of missing out. And that was just kind of like a vicious cycle. And now with the average new home cost in this country of over $400K, I just think that's terrible. I mean, the average home may not indeed be a starter home, but I think we ought to be able to build a starter home for not much more than $200K. And I don't think it's being done right now. Part of that, I think, is builders don't really perceive an adequate profit margin on a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. I can't tell you when the last one was built new in my community where I live and where I invest. So I started applying the concepts of value engineering that I had used for the commercial office buildings for myself and others to the idea of affordable housing. And what I came up with was what I call a value engineered home design. And I've got some examples of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom versions, and I've got duplex versions of all of those designed and ready to build. And being a little guy, being a small developer, I don't have as of yet the capacity to scale, but we're working on that. And so we're at the finish line of one right now, and we've learned a few things that we can apply to subsequent projects. But in essence, the designs revolve around a newer, in my opinion, better foundation system, and value engineering in the sense of laying out the living space with respect to the mechanicals, how much water and drain lines you want to put in and maintain, and heating and cooling. So those 3 areas are the essence of the design. Our designs are built on top of concrete piers and helical piles. So helical piles are large steel screws that are put into the ground that they can support a tremendous load. And between concrete piers and helical piles, we can support an entire home and save a tremendous amount of money on digging, on concrete for a basement that usually we don't even need, on subsurface soil surprises, if you will, on certain areas that might be in a floodplain that we're building about 3 feet above grade. Someone might think that in a cold climate like Michigan, where I live, well, your floor is going to be very, very cold if you do that, if you're coupling to the air instead of the ground. But in reality, you've got to treat the floor like a fifth wall. You've got to apply the control layer philosophy to the floor and insulate it for thermal concerns, just like a fifth wall. So we're actually way, way better off in energy consumption than if we had a basement. Because if we had a basement, nobody's going to take the expense and the time to put the amount of insulation either inside or outside that basement foundation wall over every square foot of it. That's a lot of surface area, and under the slab. that we have with an elevated design.
So is the basement just historically part of the structural engineering? It wasn't trying to get underground, it was just digging down to solid ground to pour your foundation?
Not necessarily, because so first let's talk about frost depth. And in Michigan, most areas our frost depth is 42 inches. So the residential code would require that we have a footing that is at least 42 inches deep. So you can do a rat wall with a crawl space that goes down 42 inches. So you can have a rat slab and then a 42-inch stem wall, a rat wall, and then build on top of that. You can even do a frost protected shallow foundation. And so you can build on the slab with thickened edges, but then you have to insulate vertically at the edge, and you have to make sure that you have good drainage underneath, because soil that holds water underneath that will work against you. And so that's more of a special case. But a basement has historically been viewed as, we have to go down 3.5 feet anyway. Why not go down 6 or 7 feet and maybe stick out of the ground another foot? And then you have all this extra space to accumulate junk and put your mechanicals.
Okay. We just moved, so the accumulate has been very, very apparent when you start moving. So it was that you needed to get down to that frost layer anyway. So the full basement was just going a bit further.
Yes.
And so now what you're talking about, in my mind, when you go to the Gulf Coast or the Carolinas and you see the beach houses that are basically the hurricane house that sits on stilts at the beach so that the hurricane can come and wash the bottom out, but leave the top intact. So you're basically looking at building on concrete stilts or steel rods that are driven deep into the ground. So similar to that, but you're not standing way up in the air.
Correct. We're about 3 to 4 feet above grade. It's got to be high enough to be able to work on the underside of it. So we don't want to be 20 inches above grade. And I think if we were much higher than 4 feet, we'd have to have the structural engineer probably spec some more helicals, or, fasten and weld them together in a certain way. So there is a sweet spot of about 3 or 4 feet above grade.
Okay. And so under the house is just dirt, and you didn't have to change it a bunch or dig in it because it's built on pilings that hold it up.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. So we have right now a duplex that we're just about at the finish line of, and each side of the duplex is 1,450 square feet. So we're a hair under 3,000 square feet. Rough dimensions, it's 50 by 60 total. And we have a total of 10 concrete piers, and we have 15 helical piles. And then we have a steel beam that sits on top of all of those, and then we framed on top of that.
So how much cheaper is that to build versus digging a foundation?
So in this case, okay, and let's do some rough comparisons, and let's compare both a rat wall and a basement. So we would have had to, and there was a lot of subsurface, like rocks and other debris. We would had to have dug a lot of it out. And by the time we got through all that, we would probably be at basement depth anyway. So rough calculations would be probably about $10,000 of digging and removing the spoils. Okay. Probably about $10,000 in a footing and a slab. Probably about $10,000 minimum in the foundation wall. So I would say minimum $30,000 more. Someone else might say, yeah, but that $30,000 got you 3,000 square feet-ish of quasi-usable space. I would come back and say, yeah, but the thermal envelope just changed. And if I want to have my mechanicals on the lower end of the cost spectrum, then I'll have to spend another $10,000 to get that basement envelope to the same standards of my above grade envelope. So there's lots of moving parts.
Okay. And I'm trying to keep up with thinking about all this. So the cost of putting it on the pilings, what's your cost there to build that where you get to the basic structure? Now you're going to start building on, so compare it to the basement.
So with this particular project, there was, I remember the concrete guy saying to me, Leah, this is a nightmare. because there was so much stuff underneath. So I think we were probably about $700 a concrete pier. And that's
Okay.
probably a little higher than what I'd like it to be, but it is what it is. And then we were probably about $400 per helical pile. Okay. And we had probably about 5,000 in steel beams.
Okay. So you're still under $10,000 for the whole base.
The whole base, we're probably a little over 10,000, but I was in my comparisons before, I was trying to conceptualize how much additional, but so, somewhere in the 25 to $35,000 range is what I estimate that we saved by doing it this way.
Okay. Now, how much, and so a little bit of my background before going to medical school, I did a lot of landscape construction and so a lot of what we did was moving surface water and rainwater away from the building. Plenty of flooded basements that we were trying to fix. Um, so once you lift it up, how much different is that concern for taking care of your surface water? And also I've lived in some places with a lot of expansile soil
Mhm.
where now your difference is that you don't have to worry about the clay breaking your foundation.
Right. It's always a good idea to control surface water because if you don't, put in means to control it, it's going to be where you don't want it to be. And so we still have a little bit of work to do with the surface water because of the excavators did a great job putting a parking area in, but the water sheet drains to a certain spot that we do have to move it yet. We don't have to worry as much in Michigan about expansive soils. I mean, we do have, certain types of clay, which has pretty good load bearing capacity. But once you're down below frost depth with your structure, you don't have to worry too much about that in this area. Um, Helicals and piers would be probably not the ideal foundation system for someone that had a lot of somewhere that had a lot of bedrock outcroppings, for example. It wouldn't be cost effective to have to blast through it. There's other ways to work. The other way of looking at that is if you go down 8 or 10 feet and hit bedrock, you're done anyway. So that could be easier, but you don't want to have to dig through it or blast through it.
Okay. And so that if you're close to bedrock, you're looking at wanting to build on it anyway and not dig into it.
And I don't have a lot of experience. I don't have any experience with that because we don't have that in Michigan.
Yeah. Oh, we were up in Park City last week and some of the building going on there where they've, taken out older homes or what's left if somebody wants to be close to downtown are steep lots. And so they're building these like 4 or 5 story homes with a very small footprint kind of into the side of a hill. And you see, and maybe it's just technology moving forward, the amount of excavation like through every generation uh increases significantly. And some of these, the hole they're digging in the side of the mountain, the amount of retaining to go in now, they're probably $10 million homes if you're building in that neighborhood.
Okay.
So that's part of why you can do that much excavation, but it's incredible the amount of, and it's not just digging, it's removing rock to open up the space to build it.
It gets expensive in a hurry and it wouldn't be a good project for a
Not-
starter home, right?
yeah, it's not a great starter home area in the heart of Park City. You're in a totally different world at that point.
Yeah.
So that's a so you have here on our screen the new housing paradigm. Now, is that a book you've got, or is that a
Yes, that's an ebook that I wrote this year, and I want to pompously promote as much as possible. I would like to encourage your listeners, if they're so inclined, to download it, and I can send you the download link. And it kind of chronicles our design, and it talks about it more in detail about how we've designed the foundation system and the layout of the homes that we're building and going to be building with this design concept.
and this is at drleenewton.com. They can get the book.
It is, yes.
Okay, so that's pretty easy to remember, and we'll try and get that in the show notes. Um, and now you talk about this design too, because It's an interesting thing having just moved and we downsized a bunch and it was this whole chaotic thing of trying to fit into a smaller place. But the place we moved into, although it's more than less than half the size of our previous home, a lot of it, the problem is just the design that there's a lot of unusable space. There's not storage space. And so you talked about designing around the mechanicals so that those were more efficient. How much also of this new paradigm you're talking about is just building more efficient space so you don't, you know, you can look at I don't know what the term would be, livable using space, but I've been in houses that are 1,500 square feet and they're small, but the way they functions more like a house twice that size. And then other places like where we're at now, um, you're like, wow, there's just like, what were they thinking? Who designed this? So how much of both of those go into, the design?
I'd say quite a bit. And my history with being interested in home design and efficiency of home design goes back about 7 or 8 years. I read a book by Sarah Susanka, who's an author and architect as well. And she's got several derivations of this book, permutations of it. It's called The Not So Big House. And her thesis was, in essence, that we live in a society that we want to have the next 3,000 square foot McMansion with 9 foot ceilings, with rooms that we'll never use because our neighbors have that. So we kind of have to keep up with the neighbors, that sort of thing. And our homes are not designed for efficiency. And an efficiently designed home, in her estimation, would maybe cost a little bit more per square foot, but it would be a better value overall because it could serve the needs of your family for a longer period of time. And so I read that and I internalized that and I agreed with that. I also, for a brief period of time, I got interested in tiny homes, but that
Uh-huh.
was only a brief period of time because I quickly realized that most of the areas of our country are zoned. They have some prevailing zoning ordinance. And at least in my area, the prevailing zoning ordinance does not allow smaller than, let's say, a 900 square foot footprint in an R2 situation. In R1, it might be 1,200 square foot footprint. So I really think that needs to change. I think zoning ordinances need to loosen up and they need to have a much smaller minimum footprint and they need to allow an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, where it makes sense to, okay?
Hmm.
Maybe not on a postage stamp size lot, but when it makes sense, allow an ADU. And so I just thought that tiny homes are probably too, the pendulum will move the other way too much for me. So I worked on, okay, how can we take your garden variety 3 bedroom, 2 bath home? How can we design it so that the mechanical and plumbing footprint is efficient, that we have the space we need to live comfortably, that we have 9 foot sidewalls, which makes the space feel so much more spacious, and a cathedral ceiling in the common area so that if you want, you can have a 12-foot, 13-foot Christmas tree if you want. Just open, spacious concept. And it doesn't cost that much more to do that.
That's interesting. So in building that efficiency, the open concept is more efficient to build because you have fewer walls.
Mhm.
Is that
Generally speaking, yes.
okay? My little brother lives in Germany, and he said in Germany they're very much about lots of walls and doors, and that every part of the home should be able to be closed off to other parts of the homes. And so when Germans come to America and they see this wide open living space, that it's very different from at least the part of Germany he lives in. So it's an interesting concept.
Well, in some areas, in some countries, you may have more, for example, extended family living under the same roof. And so that idea may make more sense.
Oh, because you got more people per square foot. That
Yeah.
if you put everybody in one room, it's like being in an auditorium and it just gets loud.
Yeah, but to your point, you had said that you recently downsized. My wife and I took our younger daughter to college last Friday, so now both daughters are in college, and we don't need the space that we've had for the past, 17, 18 years. So we're not in a hurry to downsize, but the girls are going to basically be charting their own course in life and probably eventually have their own families. And we could be comfortable on a lot less square footage.
And it is amazing when you look at that, and it's the number of times that the giant homes are two older people living there because you reached a point in your life where it's like, oh, wait, we have more money than we need now. We're going to get this really nice place. And so you go through your younger life with the kids' home in a much smaller place, and then move into the giant home when you get older. And then you end up, and that's where we looked at our old house and we're like, it's 4,500 square feet, and we're going to end up living in 1,800 of that. So we don't, my wife was like, I'm so tired of cleaning this. And, or you're hiring somebody to clean this giant space instead of a small space if you don't clean it yourself. So it's an interesting change.
Or just keeping the space relatively updated. I mean, it's nothing palatial, but it's a very nice 3,200 square foot single story ranch. But we have a half basement, and I finished that off about 12 years ago. And now I'm down there thinking everything that I did 12 years ago is almost outdated. Now we're going to have to start doing this over again.
So when we're looking at this for, a lot of the people listening to this are real estate investors. Is kind of our whole point is helping provide education for the medical community on investing in real estate. What would be your take home messages for all the stuff we've talked about today?
Take home messages. Geez, I could have many, but always keep an open mind. I like real estate syndication, but I have never actually carried out a syndication. I have done JVs, I've done joint ventures, and I've helped other healthcare professionals and other professionals in general work on their own, construct their own office buildings. But I would like to scale my home design concept a little bit. And I have a couple collaboration partners, and their pictures and bios are in my ebook. Michael Parks out of Boston, he has done quite a few apartment syndications. Jeremy Lemire in Wisconsin, he's probably one of the bigger self-storage owners in the state of Wisconsin, and they created the Navigator Wealth Fund. That right now they're working on a hotel rehab, a conversion to multifamily in Kansas City area. But as soon as they're through that, they want to do some build to rent, and the three of us are going to work together and see if we can see if we can bring the square foot cost down on, let's say, doing 10 or 20 2 or 3 bedrooms at once, instead of looking at a one-off and saying, okay, that's still a little bit more per square foot than I think I can do it at. Framers, can you go from one to the other, and can we make this process more efficient? So I guess the advice I'd give to other listeners to your podcast that are real estate investors is keep an open mind, different asset classes. To those that might be healthcare professionals is, I've got a top 10 list of mistakes that doctors tend to make with real estate. I can send that to you too if you like.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Is that all available at your website there?
The top 10 list isn't. It's just something that I had been working on for a little bit. It's not in any sort of polished format, but it's just some of them are no-brainers, but it's just some things that I don't want to say that doctors do wrong. I want to say that doctors tend to do wrong, And
Well,
then there's a couple books that that I don't have anything to do with other than telling you they're good books. Dr. Tom Burns wrote a book, Why Doctors Don't Get Rich. Familiar with that one?
Yep.
Okay, that's a great book. And then an introduction to building science, Allison Bales, A House Needs to Breathe, ... or does it, question mark. And the answer is no, but that's a really great introduction to building science.
Oh, those are great. So we'll get those in the show notes. And then, yeah, if you want to send over your top 10 list, we'll try and get that included in the show notes so people can go and take a peek at that. And you can go to surgeonsyndicate.com and look here at Dr. Lee Newton's episode, and we should have that there for you to look at. And
Great.
then if you want to get a copy of his ebook, A New Housing Paradigm, you can go to drleenewton.com, correct?
Yes, and I'll send you that download link because it may not be on the homepage, just to be
Okay.
specific.
And we can get that included too. So, Well, this has been greatly. I sure appreciate your time here. I think this has been some great value in kind of looking at the housing market and things we can look at doing better. Um, is that with your looking at building multiple homes at once? Is this something you're going to be open to investors for down the road, or is this where are you heading with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll look at it from both a debt and equity perspective. I would like to be able to do, and maybe the key starting point is maybe to do 10 at once and not get too carried away. But I was helping, just a quick side story, a friend of mine, a business owner, very savvy, very successful. He bought an infill lot and he wants to build a spec home on it. And my numbers were coming out at about 133 a square foot, which I thought was pretty good. But then I heard back from the kitchen guy and the heating guy, and that kind of blew my budget apart. So, like, I can build for about 150 a square, but I'd like to get that down to about 125 a square. And I think we can do better. And I think scaling it, both materials and labor, is part of the key to being able to do that.
Well, and that's awesome because that's less than pretty much any new construction I see now. Getting at 150 a square foot is great.
I mean, I think the average person that doesn't have connections, that's not a builder developer, I think they're going to be minimum of 190, 200 a square. I
Yep.
just think we should be able to do better than 150 on the low end. And I don't want to cut corners and do something cheaply. I don't. I mean, there's certain finishes that, yeah, you can do it more cheaply, but in 2 years you'll be replacing it, and that's not the goal either.
Yep. No, it's and so that's great to have people out there looking because I think most builders they're looking to where they can save money, but they're not redesigning the whole process to make it a less expensive to add value, same quality, but at a lower price.
Agreed.
So, well, thank you so much, Lee. And I'd like to thank everybody who's tuned in today for joining us here today on Surgeon Syndicate. And again, if you didn't hear the first part of Dr. Lee Newton's interview, go back and listen to that. It's an excellent show. And we'd like to see you here again. So please join us next time here on Surgeon Syndicate.
Do you care about paying too much in taxes? And would you like to save more of your hard-earned dollars? Here's what we found. We found that most financial professionals have a one-size-fits-all solution. So the question is, would it make it easier for you to have someone tailor your tax solutions to your individual needs so you can keep more of your money and do what you want with it? That is exactly what we do at Excelstra.
As surgeons, we know the difference between routine surgery versus life-threatening interventions. And I want you to know that I've used Unicia and her team for my personal financial intervention, and I love the results. I would do you a disservice if I didn't recommend them to you.
We'd love to help you, so let's jump on a call and see how we can collaborate. Simply go to www.excelstra.com/McManus and book your free call today.
This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, you know other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.